This is the book Spirit and Existence. In case you were wondering, it just came this week from Ireland, I think. I'm not going to talk about that book. What I'm going to talk about is how to actually find your next book. What are some tips that you can use to find the next thing that you're going to read? Because it is very important that you become an assertive reader and not a passive reader who just reads whatever sort of falls down in front of you. And that's likely to happen because in our world, people are constantly pushing books, and friends have something for you to read, and your pastor has something for you to read, and some guy talking on YouTube has something for you to read. Well, you don't have to read that stuff. So we need to be assertive and find the books that we need to read this year or over the next 5 years. How do you do that? Here's some tips for it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and we're talking about reading strategy. I think this is pretty helpful for people. I mean, I'm a reader, and I hope that that I'm talking to people who want to be readers, and yet I find that there are some ways to go from being a beginner to an intermediate to an advanced reader, and a lot of that has to do with how you pick the books that you're going to read, how to actually find different kinds of books, ones that perhaps are in those areas in which you want to be well read. When I started reading, I basically would just walk into a bookstore. Internet buying wasn't really a thing, and I would sort of look at who are the big authors and what are the best-selling books, nonfiction, fiction, and I thought, well, those are obviously the best things to read. Well, there might be some things there, but popularity, or what has the biggest stand in the bookstore, or who has the best marketing program behind their books, that's really not a great way to approach reading, and that will most likely leave you in the area of a beginner reader and never move you up to intermediate and advanced levels. So what are some of the things that I've done? Well, one of the things, and it took me a long time to figure out to do this, I picked out this book here, Philip Yancey, Reaching for the Invisible God, because I read it a long time ago, back when, it probably was in a very prominent display. I don't know when it came out, maybe 2000. And back then in the 90s, Philip Yancey was a big name, and I read his books because of that. But I realized at one point that there was something called footnotes to the book, and I could read those and find out what this person was actually reading, because guess what? He didn't read his own books, and I may have done this with this book, but I'll just do it now. First chapter. Here's who he is quoting or working with: John Updike, Frederick Buechner, St. Augustine, Eugene Peterson, C.S. Lewis, and Gregory of Nyssa. That's a good list. And that's what this guy, Philip Yancey, is reading. So look at the footnotes. Here's another book that I have read a lot of, and it was a big turning point for me to sort of start to look at who does Dallas Willard read, right? Who does Dallas Willard read? And looking at some of these footnotes and sort of saying, oh, okay, so he's interacting with that person and this person, and maybe that's where he's getting some of his ideas from. So look at the footnotes for the books that you already find to be important, the ones you already are reading. Grab your favorite books and look at those footnotes and think, who did this person have to read in order to write a book like this? The second thing that you can do is use the syllabi or leaflets or whatever they're called in your country from university or seminary courses. Use the syllabi. What are the required reading things for a particular course in the subject area that you want to learn about? And there was a time when I did this more. It's perhaps more important to me then, or I was just on that level of reading. Here's one that I found. This was actually given to me in a college course. This professor made a kind of bibliography for us, and there are lots of books on this list. And I remember a day when I actually would go through this and find my next books based on this. But all you need is the actual syllabus. I mean, find a university that you trust, a school that you trust, and find the classes that they're teaching on a certain thing. And maybe that's your school, and figure out like what's required from this. What are the things that they expect students to know? And that's a really good way to find the important things that you should know about in that area as well. A third thing very similar to that, but not so specific to the university, get recommendations from experts, from intellectuals, from people who are established as readers. Not everybody who's recommending books to you or buying books for you has a good idea of what books out of all of the books that you could read are the best books to read. And this is where we need to rely on people who have read a lot to sort of say, well, out of these 100 books that I've read, these 10 are the ones that you should pay attention to, right? So seek these people out. I remember writing an email to a particular professor at a school that I was going to go to. Sorry, this is another professor story, but I just sort of asked, what do you think I should be reading? What kind of things would be helpful for me? And he came back with a short list of names that sort of said, well, if you read these things, you'll be well prepared. And that was good. I could use that. That would take me months to get through, something like that, years even. So find people. They may be people that you know in your vicinity, people in your church, your pastor, people in your community, and just ask them, I want to read about this kind of thing. What do you know? What's good? And yeah, get them to write it down. Now, a fourth way to find your next book to add to what you're going to read is to just read everything from one author. I'm looking down here because this book here, Something to Say, Bibliography of Dallas Willard, is basically everything that you would need to read about Dallas Willard. Now, I didn't, it's not, you get this through our institute. You get it free if you become a friend of the institute, sanctus.institute/friends. I didn't plan on doing an advertisement for this in the video. Just pick an author who you think is a substantial author and just read more from them. Find out the whole scope of what they are interested in and what they know. And I've done this with a number of authors. Sometimes when I am going to read a new author, somebody I haven't read before, I will try to look for 2 books at least that I will read from them, because just one book doesn't necessarily give you a full enough picture of what they have to offer. And so looking for maybe 2 of their best books and putting those 2 on your list and reading them fairly close together within the same year is a good way to approach it. But find some authors. Doesn't have to be Dallas Willard. Obviously, he is one of the authors that I've read a lot of. But find something else. Find somebody. It's a pretty typical reading strategy that you would find somebody and go deep with one person, and out of that depth you get sort of breadth thrown in. Something that a lot of people will tell you. I'm not going to say who you should be picking, but that's a really good way to just figure out what your next book is going to be, is what haven't I read from this particular person who I already think is an important voice. And now the fifth thing that I want to mention, fifth tip, is look in bookstores. And this is a little bit outdated in the 21st century because bookstores are harder to find, but when you find them, or say you find a library or a church library or just a friend's library, use that to actually pick up books and just browse. The internet is really lousy for browsing books, but bookstores, if you know, different kinds of bookstores, really big ones, really small ones, use that to sort of browse books and finding books. This is, man, we need to have more bookstores around because this is a really useful way to find books, because the people who own the bookstores, or maybe it's a book table at a conference, they have selected certain things which they know are good for readers. If you just go to an online book retailer, they have everything. They have too much, and it's hard to know which are the right ones to be reading and which are the not so right ones to be reading. I may not actually buy them right away. Rarely when I walk into a bookstore am I looking for a book to read right now. And as I said in a previous video, reading books is not the same as buying books. Reading books actually helps you. Buying books only will help you a very, very little bit. So emphasize reading books and have a strategy, have a sensible strategy for finding new books that fit the kind of areas which you want to be reading. You need to be assertive. You need to take action and have a strategy for how you're going to find your books for the next year, 3 years, 5 years. It is to your benefit to become a better reader. I don't benefit from that, but I do want to help you, and that's why I'm doing this kind of video. And if this is helpful to you, if you learned something from that, like the video with your finger. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Keep reading. Bye.